Out of curiosity, where does your interest in fantasy come from?
It's just probably childhood interest, being into all sorts of things as a kid, whether it be like Japanese science fiction, like Godzilla or Ultraman, for example, or fantasy films, like a lot of like the great like Ray Harryhausen stuff I grew up with, like the Sinbad movies or Clash of the Titans or Jason and the Argonauts. And as far as like more science fiction goes, like I love the Alien series, or at least at least the first two movies. I love Predator. So I don't know. I have such a deep love for a lot of those things, and it comes very naturally to want to be inspired by those things and implement that sense of like adventure into the music.
Right. Do you also have an interest in fiction writing?
Oh, and fiction writing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't picked up a book in a while, but I mean, I do love the Lord of the Rings series, for example. Huge fan of those. Yeah, I haven't. I probably should like dive into a lot more literature stuff. I'm sure I could expand a lot of my inspirations that way.
Yeah. When you approach a concept, when you approach writing for an album, do you start with an overall narrative and then song by song break it down?
Yeah, that's what we did for The Way of Ancients. I don't want to give away exactly what the album is based on. I think if you do some digging and you are familiar with the source material, it should be fairly evident. But for The Way of Ancients, the record is based off of a video game series from the late 90s to early 2000s. And I think I didn't really start writing the lyrics until we had decided on what songs were going to be on the record. And then once we figured out what order they were going to be in, that way I was able to kind of map out, okay, we have 8 tracks. The first track is the prologue, and the second track is like the first chapter, and then so on and so forth. Every track kind of builds on that story and expands on it, and then the end track is like the big finale, like the big like final quest. So once we had the songs mapped out, it was pretty easy to figure out what each one was going to be about. And it was easy to figure out what song was going to be what chapter based on like the mood of the music and the riffs.
Right.
So that was a lot of fun to put all the pieces together to kind of make this entire thing realized.
So which came first in terms of the order? Did you have like a like chapters almost, and then try to fit it with the song so that they flowed like a complete narrative?
Yeah, I definitely had like the chapters in mind, and it was easy to figure out like how everything was going to be divided up once we knew like how many songs were going to be on the record. So I think once that number was determined, it was easy to you know write down like clip notes of like what each song would be about, and I would take those cliff notes and then listen through the tracks and then turn those notes into lyrics basically.
Right.
And that goes into each individual song as well. Like if a certain chapter of the story has X amount of parts, I can be like, okay, well, we'll cover this on the first verse, and then the quote unquote chorus will be, kind of like a reoccurring theme
Right.
in the story that we can come back to for the hook, and so on and so forth with like the next verse, the bridge, or whatever. So that was a really interesting process, and I think when it comes to the next one, because this is Way of Ancients is like the first record that I've written like an all encompassing like concept, like with the previous like first full length and the EP, like every song was based off of something, but it wasn't, none of those things were connected necessarily. So this was the first time I did that, and I think for the next record we also want to do a concept thing. So hopefully it'll be a bit more of a refined process, and will turn out even better next time.
Well, what made you decide to try that with this album?
It's something I wanted to do for a while. I wanted to do the concept thing around the time that we started writing the songs for Border World. But once we decided that Border World was only going to be a 4-song EP, I put that idea on the back burner because the story is at a pretty large scale, and you know, having twice the amount of music to span this story over was the time and place to do it. So it's an idea that I've been sitting on for a while, and it's a story that has inspired me for a long time. So a lot of the subject matter that I wanted to cover came pretty naturally because I'm very familiar with it.
So if someone followed the album from beginning to end, would they get a linear narrative?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Everything kind of happens like chronologically as far as the story is concerned, and I hopefully that creates like a sense of like accomplishment by the time you get to the end of the track. Like especially since like the final track is like very the Way of Ancients, the title track is very like triumphant, feels very victorious by the end of it. So hopefully the listener kind of gets that sense of like I don't know, like closure by the time that the album's over with.
So The Way of Ancients will be released by Prosthetic Records on the 1st of March. We spoke about you had a batch of songs to choose from in terms of what fit the concept of the album. So it sounds like you guys didn't go into this specifically with an album in mind, that you guys just write, not necessarily for an upcoming release, but you write because you write naturally.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true because there are a handful of songs on this record that were written before Volcandra was even a band. So like the first single we released, Fouled Sanctity, that's a song that Jamie DeMar, our guitar player, wrote. And I remember going to like some of the first Volcandra practices and showing up, and Jamie and Mike were jamming on those riffs. And I remember going into the practice space and being like, what is that? That is dope. We have to use that. And here we are 4 years later, or 5 or 6 years later, however long it's been. And that song has made its way onto a record. So that has to be pretty cathartic for Jamie, you know, to have had these riffs for so long, and now he's able to share that with the world, probably hopefully in the best way possible, because we've had time to work through all of these ideas and make sure everything flows together and try to make the best song possible out of those riffs that are probably, I'll have to ask him when he came up with them, but I know that they're fairly old. So
I mean, with songwriting being an ongoing process for you guys, and with a library of songs to choose from, when do you decide it's time to start working on an album, or when it's time to start choosing songs for the next album?
well, I think it was around the time that we kind of wrapped up our touring back in 2022 to promote Border World. And once we kind of like got the bulk of our shows out of the way for that year, we decided it was like time to get to work on the tracks. And I think we really started like making it like this is a goal that we're working towards. Like I think we tried to start on that in the winter of 2022. Probably the last 3 or 4 months of the year, we just started grinding on all these tracks, and we recorded everything within the first quarter of 2023, turned it into Prosthetic, and then we realized that the record wasn't going to come out until March of this year. So, and that's for a multitude of things. It's like, Prosthetic probably already had a bunch of releases planned, so they have to schedule us in around those other things. And then you have to consider the turnaround time for the production of the vinyl. So that was a learning experience for us, because we thought we would get the record in early in the year and then hopefully be able to put it out in like the fall of the same year. But I think the silver lining to that was we had plenty of time to prepare for the release. We shot 2 music videos so far, and we were able to get, everything lined up, all of the promotional things and what have you, have those ready. And I think the thing we learned from that was, well, we might as well you know, whenever we can find time, we might as well start working on the next one so we can keep a consistent release schedule. Because with the way that the music industry is now, I mean, there's so many bands out there putting out records and going on tours. It's easy to, I think, to get swept under the radar, because there's so many people putting out music. So you kind of just have to keep grinding at it whenever you can. And at this point, we are probably 5 or 6 songs deep into whatever the next record will be. I mean, they're still in like the demo stages, but it's at least good to like know that there's a skeleton of the next record already kind of forming.